In the discussions around urban planning, accessibility is not often explicitly mentioned, rather, it's implied. For those like myself who have a disability, it is a front and center concern. As a legally blind person, I look into transit and walkability as a matter of maintaining my quality of life, whether I aim to live in Philly, Baltimore, or Berlin. The area I live in being accessible isn't a nice perk, it's a make or break aspect of living a full life somewhere. What I've come to realize is that Europe is fundamentally accessible, whereas in the United States, accessibility is a luxury, plain and simple. I used to live around Washington, D.C. for much of my adult life. I found it quite convenient. The metro was on time enough, many stations were around built-up areas in North Virginia or Maryland. I was in an extremely fortunate location, one that many Americans don't have the luxury to experience. Access to reliable transit in many ways is a luxury, since many governments in the United States just don't see transit as a priority, while smaller city governments in Europe can find regular train service and buses ferrying people around their respective regions. This is an artist's rendition of something that really helped me navigate city streets: crosswalks where the sign would audibly tell you it was time to walk and how many seconds were left. It didn't make crossing a 6-lane intersection less scary, but I knew how much time I would have to get across. Small things like this really help those of us who don't have perfect vision. This kind of street design is almost night and day compared to my current situation. Here in the Sun Belt, transit is seen charitably as quote-unquote unnecessary government. There is only one major city in the South that can be said to have mass transit: Charlotte. Even there, many stations are so-called park and ride, which is better than nothing at all, but sad that you have to have so much parking for such little access. In areas outside of major population centers, we are left with this: decaying land that no one feels obligated to take care of, when we could have development and revitalization. People say that cars give them freedom, and that is definitely understandable. When your country has ignored public transit for decades, what option do you have? Millions of people with disabilities, however, lack that same freedom, and are in a way denied it through inaction on transit. In this kind of environment, the ADA is basically a joke. For my non-American viewers, the Americans with Disabilities Act presents a number of changes that can be made to make buildings and public spaces accessible to the disabled. Not just the blind like me, but deaf people, people in wheelchairs, people who need crutches, etc. Typically, a developer will happily provide something like an automatic door or sloping curbs, but then legally, by local ordinance, not be allowed to build dense housing nearby. Spicy take here. If someone needs to drive to reach the accessible amenity, it isn't actually accessible. There's a patchwork of development going on that is walkable, but it is almost not expandable. Towns build isolated pockets of genuinely good development, surrounded by car-oriented suburbs. It doesn't make for an accessible life when you are effectively car-bound past a 1-mile radius. Even if that 1 mile is good, it isn't good enough. The United States has only one fully walkable city where you can be car-free without a problem. It is, as you might imagine, out of reach to most people. On a fundamental level, the rest of America is designed for the car in the vast majority of cases. As we can see on this map, only one county, Manhattan, uses public transit on a day-to-day basis. When I see content from a channel like Not Just Bikes, and when I experience traveling to Europe, I get a sense of comfort. Like, this is how a city should feel. Walking down the streets to shop is a daily occurrence in the Netherlands, something most Americans will likely never experience. City governments in Europe, especially the Netherlands, understood as far back as the 70s that cars couldn't be the primary mode of transport, and so began the process of moving to a less congested, more human-scale environment. For example, biking has become more of a leisure activity across most of Europe. Today, it's almost a religion in the Netherlands. Cars still exist, but their role has shifted from absolute necessity to one among many options. While many American cities do and have made positive steps in reducing car dependency or improving urban density, they are still largely beholden to their suburban exteriors, which are quite difficult to densify and work with. One factor that could positively change things is civic engagement. Speaking at the local level, Europeans are much more involved in city politics. When the oil crisis happened in the 1970s, the Dutch people protested by blocking the streets of Amsterdam and other cities with their bikes. Americans, meanwhile, waited in queues, but there was little appetite for fundamental change. The U.S. needs places to live that are affordable, dense, and transit forward. It should be normal. But in the United States, apartments are not often built close to commercial buildings due to exclusionary zoning. The less exclusionary zoning, the more accessible a place is, the more economically self-sustaining and profitable a place is. Because in these places, people can live a more full life. Indeed, millions live like this around the world every day. They don't have to drive a car everywhere and deal with high gas prices because the price of gas is a non-factor in how people get around. In large urban centers, there's some kind of public transportation to get you from your apartment to wherever you need to go, a couple kilometers away. European cities have done the legwork, and the citizens approve of it. Today, a city of 500,000 in Sweden has over 10 tram lines, while the nation's capital struggles to fund public transit because people started using it like a real subway system, not a commuter line, and the density wasn't there. At the end of the day, to live an accessible life in the United States, as I and many other people around the world would imagine it, you either need to be very lucky, very rich, or very compromising on what you define as accessible. And frankly, I'm not willing to compromise.